Hey everybody, welcome to Kamloops Alliance Church Online. My name is Chris. I'm really glad that you're here spending some time with us. I want to give you just two quick updates before we get into anything this weekend. The first is a little update on the pathways to get involved missionally in our neighborhood and through our church. So I want to give you an update because a few weeks ago we did make a big ask. And so here's really cool, great information. 12 out of 18 people, so 12 people are reading to elementary school kids at Arthur Hatton Elementary here in our local neighborhood. Fantastic feedback, both from the ones reading and also the principal. Very grateful for what we're doing. 9 out of 10 people have signed up at Overlander to provide a service to senior citizens here in our city. And so you have the youngest in elementary school and the oldest. It's beautiful. 12 new adults for KC Kids have signed up to be on mission with our kids here at our church and for youth as well. The reason we kind of differentiate is because the adults actually help with the ratios that we need for our program Plan to Protect, but we wanted to highlight that 4 youth said, hey, I want to get in on this. And so well done, church. 1 new male peer mentor for Hopewell Clinic and Pregnancy Center. Well done. And 26 people came for street ministry training. I think if we were all in the room, you'd give a hand clap right now. This is fantastic news, guys. Get on mission with us. This is not just about you. This is about us together making Jesus famous in our city. So still areas to sign up. Go to our website, ksc.ca/serve. Get involved. Second thing I want to say is if next week you could come in person, we're going to have a prayer for healing service next week. And so maybe you're dealing with some big things in your life, emotional, spiritual, physical healing. We're going to do this in person. My friends, we just can't do this online. So we welcome you here next weekend to receive that ministry from our elders and our senior leadership. So come check that out. We are week 9. Can you believe it? Week 9 in our series in James, looking to land the plane next week as we finish off the letter. But here we go as we go into chapter 5. And what James does here is he finishes the letter how he began the letter, talking about trials and suffering. Where do you find hope in the middle of all of it? So what is your working theory of how you will not just get through, but actually thrive in the middle of some of life's hardest and most difficult circumstances? How will you decide to get through those moments in your life? We all have a working theory. How do we continue to love one another well when life isn't going as you thought? Whether it's a relational breakdown, a physical breakdown, financial crisis, how will you get through it? And as I said, everybody has a working theory of how to do that. Maybe you can't articulate it, but we all believe and hold to things when we get into some of life's hardest moments. Some of us think that the best way to handle those moments is actually just to escape, right? Oh, life is difficult. I want out. And so let me just go to a beach. I just want the sun. We want to escape. Some of us deny, right? We're like, it's not as bad, right? It could be worse. For others of us, we just compare to other people. Well, I'm better off or worse off than them. What is your working theory about how you get through life's worst moments? For some of us, we just lower our expectations, right? So we're in the middle of just a dysfunctional relationship. And so we lower our expectations about the other person in order just to get through that difficult moment. What's your working theory? Maybe we blame other people. It's their fault. They have no idea. What I think James gives us is a beautiful working theory about how to get through life's worst moments when you're suffering. Suffering is a big topic when it comes to just our world. When it comes to the lived human experience, we're all going to face it. I want to give you just a very brief kind of schema, working theory of some of the other ways people, other worldviews approach suffering. The moralistic way, the self-transcendent way, and the secular way. And then we're going to contrast that with what James gives us. The cause in a moralistic understanding is wrongdoing. And so when you think of this, think of the idea, the worldview, the philosophy of karma found in Eastern pantheistic religions. What's wrong is the cause of suffering is just wrongdoing. I did bad. The response is I need to do better, that I need to actually somehow atone. And so the better I do, the better things or the good things come to me. The good I do, the good comes to me. But the bad I do, the bad comes to me. And the resolution is eternal bliss. And when I reach this state of somehow finding all of the good and hopefully that outweighs the bad. This is a karmic understanding. The self-transcendent way is found in a actually philosophy more than a religion of Buddhism, and it's all about suffering and desire. And so the cause of suffering is just actually an illusion. It doesn't exist. The response to that suffering is detachment from those desires. And the resolution is enlightenment, to reach a state of one with all things. This is the Buddhist way of approaching suffering. The secular way, a non-religious way, is the cause of suffering is just an accident. It's just, how did this happen? It's a cosmic accident. The response is technique. So through medicine or technology or humanism, that it's all up to us to solve it through technique. And the resolution is a better society, that once we as humans kind of grapple and create solutions, that we will move towards utopian progress. That's the resolution. So these actually are working theories about how you deal with life's toughest moments of suffering. And as I said, James is going to give us a few things to think about this weekend. So here, there's two ideas: the fruitfulness of patience and the blessing of perseverance. Patience and perseverance. So let's get into it. James chapter 5, verses 7 to 9. Here's what he says: be patient. Be patient. This is what we call an imperative. An imperative is a direct instruction. Do this, okay? Do this. Now, James is full of imperatives. You need to do this. It's an instruction. Now, keep that in mind. Be patient. The instruction is very clear. And you and I had very good opportunities this week to be patient, which is essentially just long-suffering on behalf of others. Long-suffering on behalf of others. You were given a great opportunity this week to be long-suffering on behalf of others, because in November, we got just oodles of snow, way too much snow for November. And so we're all driving in traffic, we're long-suffering on behalf of others. And it's driving me crazy because people who should know how to drive in the snow, like people in Kamloops, really don't, right? And so here we are trying to grapple this, be patient, long-suffer on behalf of others, then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. This word coming is the idea of the word arrival or presence. James is talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's the Greek word parousia, and it's the arrival. In the first century, they also used this word for the arrival of a dignitary or a king, that they arrive. They are actually there present with it. And the imperative is based on what we call the indicative. The indicative is the reason for the imperative. It's the basis on which the action comes. He says, you need to be patient until the Lord's coming. Now, he's going to build upon that in a second, okay? Be patient, long suffer until the Lord's second coming. Now he gives, like James always has done through this letter, he gives us a great image. He, as a pastor, tries to bring this to life. He says, see how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. He brings this image to mind of a farmer who plants the crop and he waits. Does the work and waits with anticipation and expectation, praying that God would bring the rain to germinate this seed. As he says, in the autumn and then the spring, actually, the rain would come and really strengthen the stalk. And this is what the farmer is doing. This is a very, very, very clear image to those who work the land. You can't do anything but wait, and the outcome is not up to you, right? That's what James is getting at. Then he says, you too, like the farmer, this is connected to the farmer, like the farmer, be patient, long suffer, be long suffering, and stand firm. In the original language, the standing firm is literally to strengthen your heart. James is concerned about the heart, not a divided heart, but a whole heart that lives with integrity. You too, he says, be patient and strengthen your heart in the midst of your suffering. In the midst of life's hardest moments, make sure that you strengthen your heart. Again, there's an imperative: strengthen your heart, be patient. Why? He reiterates the indicative. Why? Because the Lord's coming is near. What James has done in chapter 5 so far, the first part leading up to this is talking about the rich oppressors, those who have all of the wealth and all of this stuff and who oppress the ones who don't have it. And James is directing this address to the ones who are going through it under the thumb of the rich oppressors. Talking to this congregation, as we saw in chapter 1, who are scattered because of persecution. He's talking to these people and he says, you need to be patient, you need to stand firm, you need to strengthen your heart. Why? Because the Lord's coming is near. He brings us an image, a reality. So I want to work with this. The Lord's coming is near. So here you are. This is you, all right? Maybe, so for some of you have the hair loss problem, so this is really good. For others, longer hair, but this is you, okay? And he says, in this moment, between the first coming and the second coming, here we are. The Lord's coming is near. Now, man, we want to know. We want to know when. When is it going to come? The scriptures aren't going to be clear on that. It just says that the Lord's coming is near, that it is imminent. At any time, like a thief in the night, Paul says in the Thessalonian letters. Like a thief in the night, the Lord's coming is near. We need to be patient, long-suffering in this moment of struggle. And we need to strengthen our hearts. Why? Because we don't know when the second coming is going to come. See, we live in a moment where all we are thinking about is the here and now. There's a philosopher named Charles Taylor who talks about us living in the immanent frame, the closed off frame full of naturalism and just causal events. There is no transcendent reality. And our secular world teaches you just to look down and look to now. And what James is trying to do, he said, no. Look up to the end. You need to live in light of that. When your life falls apart, you need to remember that the Lord's coming is near. So here's why you need to come to church. Here's why you need to be a part of this thing, because last week, James says to us when Pastor Tim was preaching, like, what's your life, man? You're here, then you're gone. Like, wake up to this reality, right? And this week, what is James saying? The Lord's coming is near. You need to live in light. You need to suffer in light of the second coming of Jesus. That we need to be patient in this life. We need to wait like the farmer does. We need to strengthen your heart in the midst of your current moment of difficulty. Be patient. Strengthen your heart, because what you see now is not going to be your reality forever. You need to wake up and live in light of the second coming of Jesus Christ. That you need to live today distinctively Christian. You see, we can't play both sides, as James has said. We can't make everybody happy except for Jesus in our life. Without living like this, we become obedient to our culture, passive to your faith. We capitulate to a busy and hurried life. We don't take time to Sabbath. We don't take time to reflect. We don't confess our sins. We play it safe. We live lukewarm. We don't steward our sexuality because we don't live in light of the second coming of Christ, and we don't suffer well. When we don't live in light, you need to be patient. You need to strengthen your heart. You need to stand firm in the midst of this. Why? Because the Lord's coming again. He says, wake up to this reality. What's your working theory about how you get through life's worst moments? James says you need to live in light of that moment. Then he gives us another idea. Verse 7 to 9, he says, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. And here, it seems like James, again, is going on a different rabbit trail, right? What's James saying? I think there actually is a connection. The word grumble here is the word stenazo. Stenazo means to sigh or groan in difficult circumstances. So he says, don't sigh or groan against, not against God, but against one another, against other people in your life. And here's the connection. James is saying when life falls apart, when you're going through suffering, the easiest thing to do is to spew your pain on other people. He says, don't do that. Don't grumble. Don't sigh or groan against one another when life gets hard, or you will be judged. I don't have time to unpack this, but he says, don't do this to each other. Because it is in particular painful times when we explode in frustration and turn on one another, because what pain does is it naturally isolates. What pain does is it naturally makes you feel like you're the only one. And so we start to pronounce moral judgment on everybody else because they don't know what it's like to be us. And we live in this world of self-pity that isolates us from community. We groan against other people. But James is saying, don't do that. Don't do that. The reality is that in the middle of your circumstance, you don't need to isolate yourself. You need to be in community together. Vulnerable, transparent, safe, and prayed for. We push people away and we grumble. And James is saying, don't do it. Don't do it. What's your working theory about how you get through your toughest moment? James says, live in light of the second coming of Jesus. It is imminent. It is coming. Secondly, he says you need people. Don't do this on your own. So I just want to ask, do you have people in your life who you can be transparent with, who you can go to for care in your life? You need this. You need this. So, second idea is the blessing of perseverance in verses 10 and 11. The blessing of perseverance. And here James does something a little strange. He says, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience. He now gives us two examples of patience in the face of suffering. The first one is he says, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. He's saying to these Jewish people, hey, you know the prophets of the Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, our Old Testament. You know them. Them who spoke in the name of the Lord. Think about their lives. The difficulty, the suffering, the loneliness, the isolation as they spoke the very words of God, how they were isolated and marginalized by their very own people and by the neighboring nations. He says, think of those people. As he says, as you know, this is well accepted in this community. We all count those blessed who have persevered. The ones who have actually not broke in the middle of their suffering. We count those people, he says, as blessed. This is the reward of, or the blessing of perseverance. And so think with me about Jeremiah. We can just take one of them. Let's just take one of these prophets that he's referencing. Think about Jeremiah. Didn't want to get into it, was too young. He said, I can't talk. I don't want to do this. And yet he said yes to it. You know what Jeremiah is known as? Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. It's like you're in grade 10, 11, 12, you're in your career class. Like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I guarantee you, nobody's saying, I want to be the weeping prophet. That's a moniker I want. That's a title I want when I get out of high school. I want to be the weeping prophet. This is who he was. The ridicule, the insult that he faced, speaking to an obstinate nation who didn't listen. Here's Jeremiah in Jeremiah 13:17. He says, if you do not listen, I will weep in secret because of your pride. My eyes will weep bitterly, overflowing with tears because the Lord's flock will be taken captive. He is the one who is weeping over the sin of Israel. And James is saying, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take Jeremiah who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count blessed those who have persevered. It's in the middle of Jeremiah's hard call, hard moment, hard life of obedience and suffering for the sake of God that he is called blessed. Think of the title of blessing in our own culture. Man, it's not the life of Jeremiah. It's one of comfort. It's one of affluence. It's one of success, of self-promotion and self-achievement. When everything is up to the right, we look at those people who live those, we're like, man, you have a blessed life. James is just saying, no, actually think of Jeremiah. He's blessed. Why? Because he persevered. And he's an example to us. James is writing this in 45 to 47 AD, hundreds of years after Jeremiah lived and wrote. It was after Jeremiah's passing that he says we actually can look back and think he was blessed because he persevered. And James is asking us, in the middle of your moment of suffering, will you crack? Will you not persevere? Will you turn your back in bitterness and grumbling against other people and against God? He says, are you willing to live whole in a divided world? You don't use your tongue to speak against other people. You don't treat rich differently than you treat the poor. And you also, he says, you don't crack in the middle of your suffering, because as you think about Jeremiah, he didn't crack, and we count his life as blessed. So as you consider this, the second coming of the Lord, I think what that does is it brings us pause to say, you know what? My life is momentary. It's but a mist, as Tim talked about last week. Am I okay for my legacy to be written after I'm dead? And what do I want my legacy to be? James is saying, you want your legacy, like Jeremiah, to be one of perseverance in the middle of it, in the middle of life's hardest. So this is the first example. Then he says this, you have heard of the second example, Job's perseverance. Again, this idea, and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. This is the second example. You've heard of Jeremiah and the prophets. Now you've heard of Job. Now Job is a really interesting example. Let's take this one out and analyze this a little bit. Job, very inquisitive. It's a long book in the Old Testament, 42 chapters long. Job is not really the great picture immediately that we think of somebody who persevered. He really wanted an explanation for his suffering. There was a lot of bitterness towards God in the middle of his searching out the reasons why, the question we all ask, why do bad things happen to good people? For Job was an innocent sufferer, and he's working through all of these hard moments in his life. And yet here, James is bringing him as an example. He's self-righteous in moments. He's bitter, and yet he clings on to God in the middle of his suffering. Here's what Job says in Job 121. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, and may the name of the Lord be praised. This is how he enters this discussion, but all the way through, there's tension and grappling, which I think is so encouraging for you and for me as we think about this moment, that Job is used positively as an example, and yet he was so honest about his experience of suffering. Why does James use Job's perseverance as an example? Well, because it says, and have seen what the Lord had finally brought about for Job. This word brought about is the idea of purpose or end. It's the word telos, which I've talked to you a lot about. The root is telos, that perseverance, and have seen. We all know what the Lord has, the purpose or the end of Job's suffering. And so what is the end? What did the Lord bring about? In the end, what happens in the book of Job, there's a lot. It's 42 chapters long. But in the end, what you see is Job, who has refined himself. Instead of shaking his fist to God at the end, he trusts in God. So I want to read to you the end of Job, Genesis 42. This is Job replied to the Lord. I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? He says, surely I spoke of things I did not understand. He was so intent on finding an answer. He says, look, I don't know. I wasn't there when the foundations of the world were created. He says, things too wonderful to me to know. You said, listen now and I will speak. I will question you and you will answer me. Job says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and I repent in dust and ashes. What did the Lord bring about in Job? He brought about a humility, a trust that although he cannot answer why this happened to me, he says, I will never find out, but I can trust in you. And here's what ends up happening. I'll read a few verses. Job 42:10. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. Verse 12. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. Verse 16. After this, Job lived 140 years. He saw his children and their children to the fourth generation. And so Job died, and an old man full of years. James is bringing Job, and he says, you need to consider Job as an example of perseverance because he grappled, he repented, he understood himself, and that Job's life was fully restored. What did he bring about? The end of Job's life was one of actual flourishing. And so what James is saying is that your present suffering is not the end of the story, that God can and will transform your story at his second coming. He can now. We're going to pray for this next week. That in the middle of your suffering, that he can break now and penetrate the hardest, most difficult parts of your physical, relational, all of your life. He can do it now. But James is saying he will do it when Christ is revealed at the second coming, that there will be scales that fall from your eyes and he will wipe away every tear from your eye. This is the hope of Christianity. What is your working theory about how you get through your worst moment? Here, James is saying, live considering the second coming. Have people close to you in your relationships, realizing your suffering is forever, and a blessed life will be yours when Christ comes again. Job saw and lived this out. There's a beautiful scene at the end of the last battle. This was the climax of the Narnia series written by Oxford Don C.S. Lewis. It's a beautiful moment that comes at the end of this series. It's a great depiction of the age to come. The main characters of this story are transported into life after this life. Here's what Lewis says through this series. He says, and for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. Oh, but for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. This is second coming. All their life in this world and all their adventures had only been the cover and the title page. Now, at last, they were the beginning, chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever and ever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. And here, through imagery and illustration and allegory and analogy in a fictional way, Lewis is pointing out the hope that is yours who follow Jesus Christ. At the hope of the second coming, that this story that we have now, Romans 8 says, these light and momentary troubles are not worth comparing to what will be revealed. This is what Lewis is getting at. That as Job's life was fully restored and fully given back, this is the hope for us who follow Jesus. What is your working theory about how you get through suffering? May I suggest that what Christianity gives you right now is way better than anything else you could come up with yourself. So we're going to come to the table. And to do that, I just want to launch off of the last few words that James gives us. He says, the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. This is another indicative. Why should we stand firm? Why should we persevere? James reminds us that the Lord is full of compassion. He's full of mercy. What is compassion and mercy? Compassion is to move towards those who are suffering and want to act. And mercy is the outcome of compassion. Mercy is the act. Again, compassion is to move towards somebody who is suffering and want to act. And the act is called mercy. And in this way, we come to the table of grace, where Jesus Christ has come to us in compassion and mercy to those of us who are and who have suffered. And it's on the cross where we see the one who is truly innocent, who dies in your place and in my place, where we see compassion and mercy in action. And so the words of institution are read to us again. Paul says, "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'" Then it says, after supper, in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup," listen, "you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." These simple elements, the mystery of the Lord's table, are the gifts of God for the people of God. And you, in your own living room, in your own space this weekend, you get to eat and you get to drink, and you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. May you live, and may you frame your current moment in light of what Jesus has done for you and what he will come to do at the end in the age to come. Bless you. Thanks for being here this weekend. Bye-bye.